Happy Hanukkah.
And Freilich Chanukah to you. In the works, in the Sfarim of Chazal, in the Gemaras and the Midrashim, there is very little in terms of historical background to the story of Chanukah. I'm no expert, but my impression is that Chazal didn't see their works as being necessary sources for history. History sources are out there, and we assume that people know the history. And so often Chazal reference historical facts without giving you much detail. So if they mention, one line, one phrase about something without any detail, the assumption is not that the details are not relevant, I would think, but I would think the assumption is that you're going to know the details from the place that everybody knows them, from the history books. And so, learning the history of that time, to learn the history of Chanukah, you have very little in terms of the actual history of Chanukah in Gemara and Midrashim. There's, of course, the famous Gemara in Shabbos, My Chanukah, where it recaps the story very briefly. The Rambam in the beginning of Hilchos Chanukah also recaps the story very briefly, but without much historical detail. What are the sources, the primary sources for the historical details of the story of Chanukah? So, we could say that the two main primary sources are the books of Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, or I think in English they usually say 1 Maccabees and 2 Maccabees. These books there are actually in total 4 books of Maccabees, but 3 and 4 are not connected to the story of Chanukah. And books 1 and 2 are also not connected to each other. They're not sequential. It's just two different books, both of them contemporary, meaning both of them written around the time, during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, when the story of the Chanukah story was contemporary somewhat, but they're not connected to each other. One of them is written actually originally in Hebrew by somebody living in Israel. The other one was written, I believe, originally in Greek or Latin, I think Greek, by somebody different. They're two very different works, different styles, focus on different details, and it's specifically actually by being able to study both of them and compare and contrast that you often come up with interesting details. I'll just give you one example of a compare and contrast that I personally came across as I was reviewing these on Shabbos. Is that in the book of Maccabees 1, in chapter, let's find this. Here we go. In chapter 1, verse 58, it says, on the 25th of the month, and it's referring to the month of Kislev, they brought they brought pigs or despicable sacrifices in the temple. So this is describing the desecration of the Beis HaMikdash that the people of Antiochus wrought. And it struck me, I never noticed this before, that this happened on the 25th of Kislev. And of course, this idea that the destruction and the redemption come on the same day is something that we find in other areas in Torah. There's the idea that Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av, and things along those lines. Now, in the book of Maccabees 2, also, I believe it's in chapter 1, let me see. No, see, he doesn't even... Yeah, it's interesting. He doesn't seem to note it here. I should have mentioned the editions of Maccabees 1 and 2 that I have over here are editions that were published by an individual in Eretz Yisrael whose name is Levi Yitzchak Chariton, who's a big scholar, from Jew. He published Maccabees 1 about 6 years ago. It's been out of print. It was republished, and Maccabees 2 just came out this year for the first time. And maybe I should mention that I noticed here at the front page they have a dedication in honor of Rabbi Yehuda Landi, who's a person we've discussed a number of times, who passed away tragically last year. He's the author of that book, Purim and the Persian Empire, from a historical agricultural perspective, and many other works, both in Hebrew and in English. In the book of Maccabees 2, it actually, when it describes the victory of Chanukah, I think it's in chapter 1, I should be able to find it quickly, it says that the victory happened on the day I'm not finding it right at this moment, but it says Maccabees 2 makes point that the victory happens on the 25th of Kislev, which is the very day that the Beis Hamikdash was desecrated. Now, the book of Maccabees 2 and Maccabees 1 are independent books, right? In Maccabees 2, it doesn't mention anywhere in the story of the desecration, it doesn't mention that it happened on the 25th of Kislev. It just, when it mentions the victory on the 25th of Kislev, it says it was on the very same day that they defiled it. And if you read Maccabees 1, an independent source, there Taka tells you that they defiled it on the 25th of Kislev. So I found that to be interesting. Now, here I have a printout of an interview which the author, the how do you say, the Mahadir, how do you say
publisher? Editor.
Doesn't know, yeah, let's say editor. So this editor, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, is interviewed. So they asked him to give some examples of things that Chazal make reference to, which are not really understood but now that but once you read the books of Maccabees, then you could better understand them. So he gives us a number of examples. One of the examples which he mentions is Megillas Tainis Esrim V'Tlosa Bey. Megillas Tainis is a work from the times of the Tanoim, Tadaic work, and Megillas Tainis is a book that records many dates in the Jewish calendar, which are special dates, including lists of dates which you're not allowed to fast on because those are like minor holidays. Now, the Gemara says that nowadays we no longer keep, whatever the correct word is. We no longer observe the dates. For the most part, we don't observe the dates that are recorded in Megillas Tainis, but we still have the work. There's different editions. Megillas Tainis is a very important work, but it doesn't get into a lot of history. So one of the dates mentioned in Megillas Tainis is that on Chav Gimel Iyar, on the 23rd of Iyar, we don't fast because it's a special day. Why is that a good day? Because Nafku b'nei Chakra Yerushalayim, the people of Chakra left Yerushalayim. Now, who are the b'nei Chakra? Why did they leave Yerushalayim, and why is this a celebration? There's no way you could possibly know the answer to that question without reading the books of Maccabees, or I believe that these stories are also mentioned in the book of Josephus. The book of Josephus is also, it seems like he takes a lot of his information from some of the books of Maccabees. So he also talks about the Bnei Chakra. Now, it turns out that actually the Chakra is a very, very important aspect of the whole struggle between the Chashmonaim and the Yevanim, and overcoming the people of Chakra and forcing them to leave Yerushalayim is actually a major cause for celebration. And so once you understand that story, then this date in Megillas Tainis makes a lot of sense. Now, Chakra is first mentioned in Maccabees 1, in chapter 1, where it talks about them building a fort in the city of Yerushalayim. I'll read to you these psukim, these verses. It's from chapter 1, verses 32. I should mention, I said Maccabees 1 was originally written in Hebrew, but we no longer have the original Hebrew. We only have the original translation into Greek, which is part of the Septuagint. And it's been retranslated into Hebrew by, I think it's by an individual by the name of Kahana back in the 1900s, if I recall correctly. The 1800s. But I could have some of the details wrong. And this is a Hebrew translation of a Greek translation of a Hebrew translation. So it says like this. They built the city of David with a great, strong wall and with fortified castles or towers. This was a place where they could trap or watch or something like that. Now the word Mitsuda is the same as the word Chakra. Mitsuda is Hebrew, Chakra is Aramaic. The sinful nation, strong people, they made their headquarters in this Chakra. They collected, amassed weapons and food. When they collected the spoil of Jerusalem, they placed it there. This was a great moikesh. How do you translate moikesh? It's in Mois Tzor. So all you people who say Mois Tzor might remember how you translate moikesh into English. Moikesh means like not a trap. It means no. Anybody help me out with a good English word for moikesh?
I was going to say trap. Yeah.
Trap? It's more than a trap. Okay, sure.
Snare?
Yeah, good one.
Snare.
Yes. And they were ambushing. They were ambushing the Beis Hamikdash. They were constantly harassing the Jewish people from this Chakra. They spilled innocent blood around the Mikdash, and they impurified the Beis Hamikdash. The people of Jerusalem fled because of them. Okay, right? So this is the Chakra. Now over here, he brings in the footnotes. So first he brings from Kadmoniyas HaYehudim. Kadmoniyas HaYehudim is Antiquities of the Jews, which is one of the books of Josephus. Josephus's books, if I recall correctly, are split into 4 different books. One of them is called Antiquities. In Hebrew they call it Kadmoniyas HaYehudim. So in Antiquities he brings some more detail about the Chakra. And he says there are different opinions amongst contemporary scholars to the exact location of the Chakra, but the relatively the accepted opinion is that it is on the southeastern corner of the Har HaBayis, across from Shar HaAshbais, for those who are familiar with the area. And he says, indeed, over there have been discovered remnants of something which seems to be a very strong fortified area, and they found their sort of heads of arrows, which match up with the type of arrows that were used by the Tzava HaSalvaki, which in English is the Seleucidite army. And here you have a picture of this thing that was uncovered by the archaeologists. So the suggestion is that this picture that you're looking at right now is the Chakra which the Chashmonaim built to fight the Jews. Now, the Yevanim built to fight the Jews. Now, why is this so fascinating? So, in addition to it shedding light on this obscure line in the book of Megillas Taanis that tells you that on the 23rd of Iyar, the Bnei Chakra left Jerusalem. Oh, so now we know 23rd of Iyar is the day when they managed to overcome the threat from the Bnei Chakra, so from the people in the Chakra. So that's why it's a holiday. But it actually sheds tremendous deep light on the whole story of Chanukah in general, on the whole on the whole celebration, on the whole Yom Tov of Chanukah in general. Because what happens is, in the 4th, after starting in the 2nd chapter of Maccabees 1, you start seeing about the war of that the Chashmonaim start fighting back, right? And by the way, I mentioned on Friday night to the family that we're used to calling all of the Chashmonaim are alternatively sometimes known, aka as the Maccabees. But actually, only one of them, his name was Maccabee. They all had sort of Greek nicknames, just like the king Antiochus was known as Epiphanes, and all of these political leaders had Greek names. So it's not clear exactly if all these names are translations or whatever the reason for getting these nicknames are. But each one of the 5 sons had a nickname. And the way it's enumerated here in the second chapter of Maccabees 1 is Yochanan was known as Gadi, Shimon was known as Tarsi, Yehuda was known as Maccabi or Maccabi or Maccabai. There's different pronunciations of how to exactly read that word. Elazar is known as Choran, and Yonasan is known as Chafus.
So everyone kind of thought it was a family
But
name.
somehow Maccabee became the famous one, and all of them became known by Maccabee. There's also some discussion of exactly what the word Maccabee means, which depends in part of whether it's spelled with a kuf or a kaf, because we don't have access to the original Hebrew, so we have just the spelling of Maccabee in Greek, with whatever the Greek equivalent of an English K is, yeah? So, but we don't know if the original Hebrew is a kuf or a kaf, and if it's a kaf, one of the famous things is that it means Micha. Is Micha Moicha, but Chaf Yavanis is an X. Micha Moicha, it's not a Chaf Yavanis, it's a Chi Yavanis.
If it matters in Greek, it's not, it's a cut.
Yeah. Yeah, but Micha Moicha B'Elam Hashem is a famous one. The author of this book spelled it with a kuf. He prefers that spelling. And Maccabi means like a hammer, like you have Maccabees. Maccabees is a hammer, and maybe because Yehuda, hit the enemy like a hammer, right? Okay, so that's in chapter 2. We get introduced to this, and it starts off with actually a story. Let's read this part of the story, which is very reminiscent, perhaps, of another story in the Torah that we know with Pinchas and Zimri. But let's read some psukim from here. So it says, so the people of the king who were forcing people to go against Judaism, against the Torah, they came to the city of Moedim in order to Lizboach. I'm not sure exactly what Lizboach means in this context. It seems like it meant to bring pagan sacrifices. Okay, so there's this big meeting happening where the people of Moedim are coming to meet the people of Antiochus who have come to the city. So the people of the king come to Matisyahu. And Matisyahu is becoming a stronger political leader as the time is going on. So they say to Matisyahu, you are very, you're the leader here. You're very dignified. You're the great one. You're supported by brothers and by children and by brothers. Children refers to his actual 5 sons. Brothers probably refers to not his actual physical biological brothers, but more to his, brothers. What's the expression? Brothers to arms.
Brothers in arms.
Brothers in arms. So you, Batisyo, you should go and bring a sacrifice on our altar over here, in accordance to the command of the king, as all the other people and all the other cities of the Jews have done. But you will be from the friends of the king, so let's make some sort of truce over here. So basically, the people of Antiochus are coming to the city of Medium and they're telling Matisyo, look, you just do this sacrifice thing, and we'll make sure we're going to recognize. We're going to make a truce with you. We're going to recognize your political stature, and we'll honor you and give you money and taxes or gifts, whatever it is. And Matisyo answers, and he says with a great voice, even if all the people in all the king's lands, which by the way is much broader than Israel, and early on here he has a map of exactly where the kingdom of Antiochus was, but it was bigger than just Israel. It says, even if everybody in the entire lands listens to everything that the king says, me and my sons and my brothers, we will go with the covenant of our fathers. God forbid we should translate Chalila, it's desecrate to us to abandon Torah and mitzvahs. We will not heed the words of the king, to veer right or left. Now, by the way, I should mention, I think that the books of Maccabees sometimes get a bad rep, at least in my personal experience, in my personal consciousness, let's say. Before I ever read these books, I used to think, these are like secular. Yeah, it's the Apocrypha. We don't really read the Apocrypha books. And also they get a bad rep because neither of the books of Maccabees mention, at least explicitly, the miracle of the oil burning for 8 days. So you kind of get this. So there's a big discussion as to why it's not mentioned or whatever. I'm not going to get into that right now. But you sort of, at least I personally, came away with the impression of like, this is for the historians, for the academia world, but it's nothing to do with me. But actually, if you read these books, and I think this is more in Maccabees 2, but in Maccabees 1, but it's certainly true in Maccabees 1 also, there is a very, very strong religious connotation to these books. These books are they're all about recording the miracles of Hashem and being loyal to Hashem and serving Hashem, and it describes absolutely miraculous victories in battle. So it's certainly the furthest thing possible from being secular, and on the contrary, I think it's very rich to see these things described in the language of people who lived through all of this
and standing up to the powers to be that are trying to force on them, pagan practices.
Right.
Not a religious thing.
What?
That's not a religious.
That's not a religious thing?
I mean,
Look what he's saying. He's saying we're not going to veer from the word of. He's saying we're not going to do the pagan sacrifices. We're not going to veer even one iota from the covenant of our fathers. Right? That's religious. Right? So after Matisyahu defies the messages of Antiochus, there was a Jew who gets up and he says, he's going to do it. So he goes and starts doing it. And Matisyahu gets up and he kills the guy and he destroys the Mizbeach. Vayikane l'Torah, and he was mekane for the Torah. He was a zealot for the Torah. Kasher also Pinchas Lezimri ben Salu, as Pinchas did to Zimri, the son of Salu. So the author of Maccabees is explicitly making the connection between Matisyahu and Pinchas. And Matisyahu calls out, which I think is often paraphrased, which is a paraphrase of the words of Moshe Rabbeinu himself, who says after the sin of the golden calf, Mila Hashem Elai. So Matisyahu is clearly paraphrasing Moshe Rabbeinu over there, and they run away. They flee to the mountains, and they leave all their possessions in the city. They don't take anything with them. They just flee to the mountains. Now that comes to anyway. It describes the struggles. The Shomer Shabbos they're in the cave hiding, and the people who are keeping Shabbos are being killed over there. And it describes the wars. And then in chapter 3, it describes the victory, which maybe we'll get to soon. And chapter 4 talks about Yehuda attempting to, actually successfully purifying the Beis HaMikdash. But there's a big but in this whole chapter 4. No, it doesn't mention the oil, we said that already. But there is a big but in chapter 4, and that is, in chapter 4, he does not manage to. Let me find it. After all of this, Yehuda says to his people to go and fight with the people in the Metzudah. The Metzudah is the Chakra. Metzudah is Hebrew, Chakra is Aramaic, right? It's the same thing. So Yehuda tells them to go and fight the people in the Metzudah, but he doesn't seem to be successful. And it's not until chapter 13, which is quite a number of years later, let's see if he says how many years. Not sure the exact numbers right here, but it's quite a while later in chapter 13 where the book of Maccabees tells us that on the 23rd of Iyar they managed to rid the Metzudah of the people there and to repossess the Chakra. So why is all of this so important? Because, like I said before, in addition to shedding light on Megillas Tainis, it actually sheds new light in the very Yom Tov of Chanukah. Because we are used to thinking that Chanukah, and the way the Rambam presents it, and the way it's presented in the Gemara, right? That Chanukah is the time when the Jewish people overcame the enemy. So there was a war between the Chashmonaim and the Yevanim, and we won the war, and so we celebrate Chanukah. But actually, the war itself, the threat itself from the Yevanim, was not complete by Chanukah. It still took many years of struggle until they managed to get the people of Chakra to leave, and then the Jewish people had complete control of the Yerushalayim and the Mikdash.
So
what did happen? One second. So what did happen on Chanukah? On Chanukah is when they regained possession of the Beis Hamikdash. It was no longer, besides the Chakra, but the Beis Hamikdash itself, they now had full control over. So it gives a much deeper, to me, it's like, the Chanukah, we're not just celebrating the physical victory of the war, that continued to be a struggle, and it wasn't fully, it was partially resolved, but it wasn't completely resolved for a while. But the reason why we celebrate the major holiday of Chanukah in Kislev, and not, let's say, why do we make Chanukah and Chav Gimel Iyar after they got an anniversary of the time when they got rid of the people of the Chakra? That should be the major celebration of overcoming the war. The answer is no, because as far as we're concerned, the major celebration is the time when we gain possession and maintain control of the Beis Hamikdash. Yes.
So how many years does this whole story go for?
I can't answer that question off the top of my head. We have to read the books in more detail. I think the big struggles until they overcome the Beis Hamikdash is, I think, somewhere between 2 and 4 years. But until they get the Chakra back, it's another 20 years, I think he says here.
Oh, wow.
So it certainly takes a while. Now, another thing which I wanted to mention is the association. I actually alluded to this on this past week. On Wednesday, legal holiday, we had a class, so I wanted to mention this over here as well. The book of Maccabees 2 starts off with a letter written from the people of Yerushalayim from the Jews of Yerushalayim to the Jews in Egypt, telling them to celebrate the Yom Tov of Chanukah. Let's read a few psukim, and then there's a specific point I want to focus on. La'achem ha'Yehudim asher b'Mitzrayim, to our Jewish brothers that are in Egypt, the bracha with a blessing. Ha'achem ha'Yehudim asher b'Yerushalayim, from the Jewish brethren in Jerusalem, asher b'Eretz Yehuda, and in the whole region of Yehuda, Shalom Tov, good of peace. By the way, you could see right away that even though Maccabees 1, we're working off a translation of a translation, but you could tell that it was originally written in biblical Hebrew style. So when you read a verse in the book of Maccabees 1, it very much could sound like I was reading to you a pasuk from Nach, that you're familiar with. The book of Maccabees 2 is very different style, and it doesn't. It's not reminiscent of the language or the style of Nach, and I think if you just listen to a few psukim, any page you open up, it becomes very evident that that's the case. God should be gracious to you. Remember you should remember his covenant with his faithful servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Should give a heart to all of you to fear him, to do his will with a full heart. You should open up your hearts in his Torah of our mitzvahs, and with the mitzvahs should make you peace. You should listen to your prayers and fulfill your prayers. Should not abandon you in bad times. And we here in Jerusalem are indeed praying for the welfare of you, our Jewish brethren in Egypt. But Malchus Demetrius, in the kingdom of Dimitri, Bishnas Mea V'Shishim V'Seisha, and this is in the year 169. We wrote to you about the terrible tragedies which had befallen us, that befall us in those years. How they burnt down the gates, and they spilled innocent blood, and we prayed to Hashem, and he listened to us. And we brought sacrifices in thanks, and we kindled the lights. So perhaps that's some sort of allusion to kindling lights. And we placed the bread, perhaps referring to the bread on the shulchan. And then it says, and now, you should observe the holiday of Sukkot in the month of Kislev. So he's telling that the people of Jerusalem are telling the people of Egypt, we told you in the past about our troubles, now we're telling you about a victory, and how we thanked Hashem, and so you should celebrate the holiday of Sukkot in the month of Kislev. So there's a clear association here being made between Chanukah and Sukkot, so much so that we're referring to Chanukah as the Kislev Sukkot.
Eight days.
So it's 8 days and 8 days. Some of you may recall from the Gemara in Shabbos that there is the opinion of Beis Shammai that we start lighting candles, start from number 8 on the first night, going down all the way to one lamp on the first night. Why do we do so? Because one of the reasons the Gemara gives is Keneged Parei Achag, that just like the sacrifices in the Beis Hamikdash on Sukkot start from 14 parim, 14 bulls on the cows on the first day, and going down 13, 12, etc., you go down from up to the bottom. So too, you light the Chanukah licht from top to bottom, right? But so, what's the connection between Sukkot and Chanukah? Benzi, can you do me a favor? In the printer, there should be 1 or 2 pages. If you could please bring them to me, I forgot to bring them before. Thank you. So the name Chanukah clearly hadn't yet been established. So we call it the day, the day of Sukkot, the holiday of Sukkot in Chanukah. Now, in chapter, this is here in chapter 1. In chapter 10, it elaborates in more detail. Let me read you what it says in chapter 10. It's chapter 10, verses 5 to 8.
It doesn't explain what that would look like, celebrating Sukkot.
Oh, very good, very good. So now we go to chapter 10. Over Oisa Yoim, listen to this. Over Oisa Yoim, Rabbi Isai, over Oisa Yoim, on that day, Chulal HaMikdash B'dei Nachrim, that the Beis HaMikdash was desecrated by the Gentiles, Eiru Gam Tiyah HaMikdash, on that very day, the Mikdash was purified, right? So that was what I was referring to earlier, that in the book of Maccabees 1, it tells you that it happened on 25th of Kislev, the desecration, and now we're saying that the victory, that the purification of the Mikdash also happened on the same day. They celebrated in Kislev from the 25th of Kislev for 8 days with joy, just like the holiday of Sukkot, B'Zachram, when they remembered, that just before a very short amount of time, just 6 weeks ago, they were wandering on the holiday of Sukkot in like animals in the mountains and the caves, right? So just 6-7 weeks before Chanukah is Sukkot, and instead of being able to celebrate Sukkot as they should have been in the Beis HaMikdash, they were wandering in the mountains and the caves like animals, like they didn't have access, they were exiled. And therefore on Chanukah they celebrated for 8 days like the Sukkot that they missed. But lulavim, with lulavim, thank you. Over anofim, and with branches of anofim adurim, and with beautiful branches of the kapis tamarim, and with palm branches, biyadehem, in their hands, hilalu, they celebrated, they praised, lasher etzliach biyodam, that they were successful, the tyrus mechoyne, to purify his abode, God's abode, right? So here, over das kulam nimnu, and all of them agreed, v'kovu, and they established l'chol ha'am yehudim, for all the Jewish people, lachig midei shana b'shana es yom me'elu, to celebrate every day, every year, these days, these 8 days of Sukkot in Kislev. Right? So, what do we see here? First of all, we see that the celebration was to make up, so to speak, for the Sukkot that they missed just a few weeks earlier. And now, if I'm understanding correctly, the truth is that they didn't just miss Sukkot, they missed Shavuos and Pesach, everything, but Sukkot was the most recent holiday that they had missed. It was just a few weeks before, and so that was what they chose to be mashlim, to how do you say, to rectify or to make up. And there's a specific reference that they went so far as to use to shake the 4 species. It doesn't say esrog, but it says palm branches and other beautiful branches, which seems to be a reference to the hadassim and aravis. So it seems like they mamish mimicked sukkahs on Chanukah. Now, the truth is that they did the Arba Minim, but they didn't do sitting and going into Sukkah. So this is where I want to go with this. It's a little bit to delve into the meaning of Sukkah and Arba Minim, and how it pertains to Sukkot and to victory and to Chanukah, and how all of these things line up. So first of all, I'm going to read to you the notes from Rabbi Chariton's edition, and then I'll have some more sources to share as well. So shesteht azoi. In Medrash Chanukah, Noitzer Midrashim, page 194, it says like this: So again, this is the Medrash. This is not a history book. So the Medrash is talking to you in Medrash language, but often being aware of the history, it sheds deeper light on what the Medrash is saying. So it says like this: Amad HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'kaval lahem shmonis meChanukah shelo yehoya meid ad achshav. Hashem established for them the holiday of Chanukah, which was not a holiday until now. Amad HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says, "Chashavtem laker shmonis me'achag." You intended to uproot the holidays, including the 8 days of Sukkot. Hineni mevi aleichem shmona yomim. So therefore, I'm going to bring upon you 8 days of celebration, namely what we now know as Chanukah. Now, says Rabbi Chariton, perhaps it could be that the connection between Chanukah and Sukkot is actually more is not just sort of coincidental that it happens to be we had to make up for Sukkot, which we just missed a few weeks prior, so we have an 8-day holiday, but actually there's a more intrinsic connection between the two. Because both of them, both Chanukah and Sukkot, represent manifest the rejoicing in the victory of the Jewish people over those who want to get us. And Chanukah, it's at face value, kapashut, and on Sukkot also that taking the 4 species on Sukkot represents this idea, because why do so he brings in the Medrash, which, by the way, for those of you in Chabad, the Rabbi very often quoted this Medrash. That the lulav, holding the lulav, represents the people who are victorious against their enemies, and they hold the lulav as a sign of victory. That's what the Medrash says, Didan Notzach. So that's how it's famous in Chabad.
No, so it's Sephiros too.
Yeah. Now, the Rebbe used to quote this Medrash a lot, that 2 people go into die and we don't know who's going to win the case. Then the one who comes out holding the thing, we know he was victorious. So the Medrash says, Kach Yisrael, so to the Jewish people, V'om Yisraelim and the nations. So our enemies come and are mekatrig. How do you say in English mekatrig? Prosecute against us in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Rosh Hashanah. We don't know who's going to win. Are we going to win and be signed and sealed for a good year, or are the enemies going to win and we're going to not have a good year? When the Jewish people emerged from in front of Hashem after Yom Kippur, with a lulav and esrog in hand, so we know that indeed the Jewish people are victorious in their din. Now, so on the one, okay, so let's just touch up over here. Let's summarize what we're saying here. We're saying here that the Jewish people, they missed the holiday of Sukkot, and so they celebrated the 8 days of Chanukah to make up for that, and they used the lulav. But there's perhaps even a deeper connection that they didn't just use the lulav to make up for Sukkot, but also they used the lulav just like on Sukkot. The lulav represents our victory. So to here, they're celebrating. They're not just celebrating simcha. They're celebrating a simcha of victory. So they're celebrating a simcha of victory. So it matches up to have lulav. Now, I want to read to you a vart from the Netziv about the connection between Sukkot and victory, and how he ties together the mitzvah of lulav representing victory, and also the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah. I think you mentioned that, representing victory. But there's actually another point that needs to be mentioned, and that is that regardless of simcha of victory, we could make the argument, and I spoke about this for those who may have been here on Sukkot, that lulav in and of itself is also a manifestation of simcha. Where do we see this? It's almost like a musical instrument. So we spoke about this on Sukkot, and I brought a number of sources for it, and I want to touch upon it again now. First of all, to review, and also I think there's a couple of more sources. Let me see if I could find it a second. 53, 13, 51. Here we go.
Like a percussion instrument?
Just a second.
Swishing. No, it's like the Mexican.
Here we go. So here it says, it has nothing to do with Chanukah. It says that they came. This is on the 23rd of Cheshvan, whatever the victory of this particular battle that the book is talking about here in Maccabees 1, chapter 13, verse 51. And it says they came by Hallel, they were reciting Hallel, over Kapos Tamarim, and with palm branches, over Kenoiros, and with violins, over Supim, and with drums, over Nevolim, and with Shirim, over Zemiros, with song and dance and musical instruments, right? So here, we again encounter palm branches, but not necessarily in the context of victory, or not only in the context of victory, but in general in the context of rejoicing. And here also, in the footnote, he brings a couple of sources. Some of these sources I quoted when I spoke about this on Sukkot. One of them is the Medrash Bamidbar Rabbah, which says that the Alavim, Menagnim, V'chol Yisrael, Masachkin, Miv Sheyesh B'yodei Lulav, etc. We also brought the pasuk from Shmuel Beis, where it talks about Menanaim as a musical instrument, and some say that it means a lulav. I'm sorry, this Medrash says that it refers to a lulav. I think Rashi might also bring it, and then another source which he brings here, which I didn't quote on Sukkot, is from another book from the Apocrypha, which is the book of Yehudis. Now, the book of Yehudis is famously the source of there's a famous story of Yehudis, which is also associated with Chanukah. It's the reason why we eat dairy foods of Chanukah, because of Yehudis, who gave the general cheese, and then he was thirsty, and she gave him wine, and then she removed his head, etc. So that story is found in another book from the Apocrypha, known as the Book of Yehudis.
You need a head to live.
So yeah, she unalived him.
Cut his throat. She cut his head off. I mean,
So,
You need a head.
all right, Rabbi say. So,
I think you can love that.
in the book of Judith, it says a psik reisha v'lo yamos. He cut off his head and he won't die.
There'd be a lot of like painful puns, but like.
Okay, so in the book of Yehudis, chapter 15, verse 12, I'm quoting to you from Rabbi Chariton's footnotes. It says that all the women of Israel went to see her and blessed her and made a dance for her. And again, I haven't seen the context, but it could be that this is after she, comes back showing that she's killed the general. And she took palm branches, lulavim, in her hand, and she gave to the women, and they all started dancing with lulavim. So, Akapanim, we see from all these sources that lulavim have to do with rejoicing. It seems like all of them have also a connotation of victory, except I'm not sure if the one from Shmuel Beis. For David B'chol Beis Yisrael Masachkim Lifnei Hashem, when they bring back the Oren. There's certainly an idea that lulav is part of like nowadays you might say go with a tambourine or with a whistle or something, to go and cheer at a parade. So once upon a time, a lulav was the same idea. Now, those of you who have learned Maimorei Chassidus of Chabad will be familiar that often there's this question asked at the beginning of the Maimon, what's the connection between Sukkot and Chanukah? Maybe I should have done my homework better, but from what I recall right now, it's usually explained as being the association of the number 8, that 8 represents that which is beyond Hishtalshlus within the normal order of things, within the normal cycle of things. 7 is a complete cycle, which is why there's 7 strings on the harp and the 7 musical notes. And actually, in honor of our rationalist friend over here, we could mention that at least in one place I recall the Rambam writes this, that he says in Mer Nevuchim, the Rambam writes, why is Sukkot and Pesach for a whole week, for 7 days? So he says, because 7 is a complete cycle, and b'meila, if you want to have enough time to internalize the message of Sukkot and Pesach, which in the Rambam's Mer Nevuchim, the message is the temporary and fleeting nature of anything materialistic that we have. So on Sukkot we leave our house. On Sukkot and Pesach also we leave our usual eating habits. So in order to actually for that to have a real impact on you, it needs to go through a full cycle of 7 days, right? So 8 is that which is beyond that. So the Sukkot is beyond Hishtalshelus, specifically Shmini Atzeres is the day which is just for the Jewish people, which is beyond the normal order of things. And Chanukah also shares that quality, which is why on Chanukah we light the Chanukah licht by night outside. We brighten up the dark, etc., etc. So here we see that it's not just sort of this Kabbalistic or mystical idea, but actually it's very strongly anchored in the history of it. Now, in the Netziv, in his Chumash Hamik Dovar, which is his commentary to Chumash, the Netziv Stalzach on the pasuk in Parshas Emor, where it says, "Ve'dabir Moshe es me'ed Hashem al bnei Yisrael." I'm sorry, before that, in pasuk chapter 23, verse 43, that 42 and 43, Basukkos Teishu Shivas Yamim, you should dwell in Sukkos for 7 days. Why should you sit in the Sukkos? Laman yedu derisechem ki Basukkos Hashavti es bnei Yisrael v'yitzei yosam me'etz Mitzrayim. So basically, the mitzvah of Sukkot is to sit in the Sukkah. Says, then it's said like this. Let me read to you his words. Elo yeshoid and I have some more words to say over here. Now the pasuk juxtaposes the mitzvah of Sukkah to the mitzvah of taking the 4 species. It would have seemed more in sequence for the pasuk to first tell you to sit in the Sukkah, which was what that creates the Yom Tov, Chag Ha Sukkos, right? Sitting in the Sukkah is what creates Yom Tov. And then once you've said you have the Yom Tov, now it should tell you to sit in to take the Arba Minim. By the way, there's a sikha from the Rabbi about this as well, where the Rabbi is medayek from these psukim that it's the other way around. Indeed, that it is the mitzvah of Arba Minim that creates the Yom Tov of Sukkos, and that in absence of Arba Minim, you don't have to sit in the Sukkah, and it pertains to the question of whether or not the Yom Tov of Sukkot existed in the desert, or it only started once they came into the land of Israel. And over there, there's the famous Rambam that says that Mimoshe Yeshua we've been taking in Esrog. So the Rambam seems to perhaps allude to the fact that the mitzvah of Esrog only started post the lifetime of Moshe Rabbeinu. Anyway, that's beyond the scope of what we have to do right now. But there's certainly parallels to these points being raised by the Netziv are also raised and addressed and elaborated by the Rebbe in Likutei Sichos. If I recall correctly, it's in Likutei Sichos, volume 17 on Parshas Emor, but I could be wrong. Ela Balan says in the Netziv, it's coming to teach us that the truth is that both the Sukkos and the Lulav are coming to serve the same purpose. The Medrash says in the pasuk Imis b'mincha netzach that taking the 4 species is a demonstration of victory in the battle, which is the Medrash we mentioned before, that you come out from the court case with your victory of the Lulav. And then he quotes the Medrash, the other Medrash of Bamidbar Rabbah, which is of Shmuel Beis, the Lulavim. Now, v'hinei derech shavi milchama b'simcha hoilchim ba'oyalim k'mei be'esh hoilchim l'milchama v'einu b'sadeh. People who come back from war, they celebrate their victory in the tents, just like when they go. It says k'mei be'esh hoilchim l'milchama v'einu b'sadeh, like when they go to the field to war, they're in the field. So it seems like, I guess, on your return from war, you don't just go straight home, but you stay out there and make a party on the outdoors. And so Hashem wants to sort of make us aware of this aspect as well. So he commanded us to sit in the sukkah, as the Jewish people were when they left Egypt. We left Egypt, like the pasuk says in Parashat B'Shalach, armed with weapons to go to war. So too every year after Yom Kippur, where we have been victorious in the war against the prosecutor who wants to make us not have a good year. So now we go out to celebrate our victory. The Medrash says we go out with the lulav. Says the Netziv, that's the same purpose of sitting in the sukkah. It is to celebrate this. So he says that one of the reasons for the mitzvah of sukkah is to recall the victory, both the victory after Yom Kippur and also the general victory of the Jewish people, having been successful in fleeing successfully from the Egyptians. Now, all right. Okay, so that's the gist. And again, I would like to suggest to myself, still a few days left to Chanukah, and also to yourselves, you could Google it. The books of Maccabees are available online in English,
Safari.
and on I don't know if we could mention
Safari?
that website. Google it. It's on Safaria. We don't support Safaria, but it's on Safaria. What?
Why not?
Why not?
They include heretical material
Really?
on their database.
It's a Christian.
Ari is a very holy thought. He wouldn't even notice anything heretical. But for us regular
Tell me
people,
what to look for.
What? So, but the books of Maccabees are available in English. They're also available in Greek for those of you who prefer Greek. I personally have found that seeing the history recorded from somebody who lived contemporary and with such a strong religious bend to the narration, all talking about the miracles of Hashem and being thankful to Hashem, I personally find it to be very powerful in a way that much more than the way I'm used to hearing the stories from when I'm a kid in school and throughout the years of Once Upon a Time and Antiochus the Wicked King, and without any of the etc. And we wish everybody a freilich Chanukah, and hope to see you all